Hello YouTube, Dave here again. A while back I did a video series on the magazine installments of the Shackeled City Adventure Path. When I was doing those videos, or at the end of that series, I had mentioned that Paizo did release a hardcover compilation of the Adventure Path, including some updated and new material, and I had planned on covering it at some point in the very near future. Unfortunately, I got pretty sidetracked from that, and I never did get around to actually getting the video done. There were situations or times where I had tried to record it, but other things sort of got in the way, either technical issues with the equipment I was using, such as the older camera that I had at the time, simply corrupting the video files before I could transfer them to my computer, or issues with just trying to record them with all kinds of noise going on around me, which was distracting. There's just all kinds of things that got in the way, and I just never got around to it. And I really wanted to fix that and just never did. So today, we're gonna do that. Now that I'm actually going back to my Age of Worms series, I feel like this is as good a time as any to finally just cover the Shackeled City hardcover compilation put out by Paizo Publishing. This released in 2005 and retailed for around $60 US or $80 Canadian plus tax. The majority of this book is dedicated to just reproducing the individual installments of the Adventure Path, just putting them all together in their own separate chapters, all under one set of covers. So I'm not going to go too much into that so much. Like, we'll flip through the book a little bit, but I mainly want to focus on the stuff that's been added to this, sort of the new material, or the things that have been added just to make running the campaign so much easier and smoother. The first thing that's included is this poster map. It is a double-sided poster map, and we'll take a look at the second side here towards the end of the video. But this gives you a really good layout of cauldrons that the players can sort of look at, as well as a map key that you can reference as well, and a cross-section showing what it looks like, what the city looks like, built into the bowl of, in the magazines, an extinct volcano, but in the hardcover, it was actually a dormant volcano, which leads us to one of our first differences. I'm not going to go into every single difference or change that's made because there are just so many little minor tweaks that it would become a bit too redundant to go over them, but I will at least try to address some of the more major changes that they made to the adventures contained within. One of the big things that they had to do in the early days of the magazines was because they weren't entirely sure if this adventure path concept was going to work, there was a mandate passed down that each of the individual chapters had to on their own be able to be run as a standalone adventure without having too many plot threads running throughout each of the issues, so that if you didn't run, say, Life's Bazaar, you wouldn't have any issues running Flood Season, or Zaz's Trajectory, or Asylum, or any of the installments contained within. This is really true, especially of the first few issues, where the events that take place do feel completely and totally disconnected from one another. The only thing that really felt like was connecting them was just the region that they took place in. However, the magazines at the time did sort of let the DM know the plot threads that were running over the course of the adventures. However, it was stuff that was so deeply buried in the background that there was no way that the players would have any chance of being able to discover any of this information. It was more of just a way of helping the DM connect the issues if they were running it as a campaign. So the book didn't have that problem because the Adventure Path was a huge success. It was actually pretty influential on Paizo overall. So with the hardcover, they were actually able to finally just have everything a bit more tightly woven together. So there are some minor things that they do to just sort of make that more clear that this is a storyline where all the parts are connected, even if it doesn't necessarily seem that way on the surface. So just minor things like having some of the locations maybe change to where in the original adventures they may have taken place in the lava tubes underneath the city of Cauldron, to in the hardcover, because so many things took place in the lava tubes under Cauldron, some of these locations were moved further away from the city just so it didn't feel like there was just so many things packed underneath the city itself. So there's stuff like that. There's sort of like NPCs appearing more frequently. For example, Marethan, the leader of the Striders of Farlangan, he appears in the first installment of the magazine, but in a future installment where the characters encounter the Striders again, where one of the members had been captured. In the magazine, it was just another NPC member of the organization that the characters would speak with. However, in the hardcover, they actually had it be the same person that they encountered at the very first time they met with the organization, just that way they could have the NPC sort of reoccur. So there's stuff like that. But let's just take a look at, like I said, the sort of the new material or the expanded material that they include here. The inside cover actually reproduces portions of the Cauldron map, which is really cool. It's just a nice little bit of artwork there. We have our introduction and foreword here. The introduction, the foreword was written by Chris Thomason, I think it was. He was the editor of Dungeon Magazine at the time, or at the time that the Adventure Path was coming out. So he actually got to say some words there. And then you get the introduction to the campaign itself. Now, this chapter was awesome for me trying to run this campaign because the actual background stuff, elements of the campaign, a lot of it wasn't introduced until the later chapters of the campaign, to the point where it was almost ready to wrap up. You would get what were called adventure seeds, where it was a little sort of preview, a little blurb about something that you could expect to see in a future installment, or something you could use to expand the adventure yourself if you wish to. But a lot of the background stuff wasn't revealed until near the end of the campaign. So if you needed or wanted that frame of reference from the beginning, you actually do get it here with the magazine. So it gives you a background on the Cage Rights, which are the villainous organization that's behind everything that's taking place in the city of Cauldron. You get a description of all of the important NPCs that you will discover along the way, as well as some DC numbers and results for trying to research some of the villains once you learn of their existence. Some of the helpful NPCs that you might discover along the way, some of the members of the Cage Rights themselves, like the actual members of it that you can discover through your research, stuff like that, and a history of Cauldron itself, the city and the region, when it was first used or settled by a enigmatic six-armed humanoid race known as Spellweavers, up until the modern day, right when the campaign begins. So you get all kinds of background information. You get a rumor table. There's 41 rumors in total. However, you can only learn certain rumors based on the chapter that you're currently running. So if you're running chapter 1, for example, you can only learn rumors 1 through 20 because you roll a d20 to see which rumor that you learn. And then each subsequent chapter adds a modifier to your d20 roll that can give you more and more information up until you can finally get a plus 21 to your roll, which will allow you to learn any of the end game rumors, and also eliminates the early stuff that would no longer be important to the campaign. So again, it was really well done, the rumor chart, and I really enjoyed when my players would try to learn rumors throughout the course of the campaign. You also get a detailed explanation of Cauldron with the map key and some various locations for you to explore, including inns, taverns, and shops, including Sky's Treasury, which is the area in Cauldron where you'd be able to purchase and procure magic items. So you've got things like magic armor, magic weapons, different potions, different minor wondrous magic items, all kinds of stuff that you'll be able to find throughout the course of the campaign. So again, really, really awesome stuff there. It was just a really great detailed chapter that made it so much easier and just made it so, like, when I went to run the campaign, I was able to finally fully know everything that was going on. I knew the entire Cauldron region really well in case the characters wanted to explore beyond just the city itself. It was just a lot of great information to have before you even began the first session of the campaign. You get the map of the Cauldron region, which includes areas like the Demon Scar, which the characters go to, the lair of Hookface, which is not a location that's actually explored during the events of the campaign, but it's good to know, roughly where it is, because the characters do confront the Red Dragon, legendary Red Dragon Hookface, near the end of the campaign. So after defeating the dragon, they may want to seek out its lair for its, treasure and riches. So now you know kind of where that is. It also includes things like the Spire of Long Shadows, which plays no role in the Shackled City adventure path, but a huge role in the Age of Worms, which was the second campaign to come out after the first campaign to come out after this one, the second adventure path overall for Dungeon Magazine. In fact, it even mentions that the Spire of Long Shadows plays a role in the upcoming installments of the Age of Worm adventure paths, scheduled to begin in issue 130 of Dungeon Magazine. So I've already covered the first few chapters of the Age of Worms, but it's cool again to see, because like this book came out shortly before the first installment of the Age of Worms Adventure Path. It's just kind of cool that it gives you that little teaser there. And then, like I said, we get into the actual adventures themselves. They're all pretty well reproduced, again, just with some new information included. Life's Bazaar actually has probably the most noticeable changes from the magazine to the hardcover, because the magazine included or allowed you to download a web enhancement from the Paizo website. It was stuff that you could use to enhance the adventure, but they weren't necessarily pertinent to running the adventure. But the web enhancement is included in this in the hardcover. So the adventure begins with a lot of disappearances taking place, and the players are eventually called upon to discover, what the cause is behind it. And one of the things that the players may have asked for during that point in time was a list of the kidnapping victims or the disappearing people. And the magazine didn't include that. It included the 4 children that were taken from the orphanage, the Lantern Street orphanage, but beyond that, it didn't give you anybody else. So the web enhancement included all of the victims that had disappeared from the very first one up until the 4 kids were taken from the orphanage. So it's kind of cool to have that in here. It includes their names, their gender, their race, and their age, as well as sort of when they went missing and what they were sort of doing at the time, or some information about them that you can reveal if the characters kind of go around and ask about them. The other big change in this adventure versus the magazine is when they explore the ruins of Zitarum, the gnomish enclave that suffered from the Vanishing Plague, a magical disease that caused people to just essentially just fade out of existence. They would just become more and more transparent until they were gone altogether. The web enhancement included, because this is a gnomish enclave and gnomes like, cunning traps, there was a trap known as a tilt-a-pit trap. Basically, what it is it's a pit trap. However, it's actually more like a pendulum. So when somebody falls into it, the force of the fall causes the pit to actually sort of swing back and forth, causing whoever's inside to get slammed against each of the walls repeatedly until the pit stops swinging. In the magazine, they were just regular pit traps and nothing else, because there is a ton of text to describe how they function. So they just didn't have room in the magazine for that. So they cut all that out and just had standard pit traps. But if you downloaded the web enhancement, you would have had this. Or if you bought the hardcover, now it's in here. So most of the installments, like I said, are pretty much the same all the way through. They're, like I said, minor changes to make them fit the overall campaign better, because they could do that now with the hardcover, where they had to be careful about how closely linked they had things on the surface for the individual chapters of the magazine. We also have a brand new chapter that's included here. So the original magazines had 11 chapters, and there was a gap between the first chapter and the second chapter as far as level progression goes. Life's Bazaar began at level 1 and ended with the characters being at 3rd level. And then Flood Season actually began at level 4. So there was a gap between level 3 and level 4 that, as the DM, you had to try to find a way to fill, either giving the players level 4 early on in flood season and then just going through the rest of the progression, or just giving it to them before they even begin the chapter, coming up with a side quest that they can do. There were things that, that you may have had to do to try to fill that gap in, but with the hardcover, they actually produced a new chapter. Now, it's referred to here as a missing installment, alluding to the fact that it was originally designed alongside everything else, but just not printed in the magazine. And I got to be honest, I'm not sure if I believe that to be true. I honestly think it's more likely that they just realized after the fact that there was a level gap in the adventure path. So when the hardcover was announced, they found a way to produce this. I don't think this was like a web enhancement or anything else along those lines. So I don't know. I'll have to dig into the history of this particular chapter. But essentially, it's a pretty short chapter because it's only really designed to get the characters from levels 3 to level 4. But after the events of Life's Bazaar, when the characters return the missing children from the orphanage, break up the slave trading ring that was taking place below the city, they get a little period of time to rest. But during that time, a crime wave starts breaking out where a group of goblins start menacing parts of Cauldron. They leave behind graffiti, they mug people in alleyways, or they break into warehouses to steal things. So they're becoming a bit of an annoyance. With the newfound celebrity that the players have at the end of the Life's Bazaar chapter, they're summoned by the captain of the City Watch, and they are basically tasked with finding out what's happening, where these goblins are coming from, and putting an end to it. The player's investigation is relatively fruitless until they have an encounter with a female human rogue member of the Last Laugh Thieves Guild by the name of Jill. Jill was someone that they may have encountered in Life's Bazaar. She was present in one of the earliest encounters, although she may not have directly gotten involved in the encounter. The characters may have simply spotted her on a rooftop and then she disappeared, or she may have actually fully engaged in combat or parley with the characters. It depends on what your players did during the course of the encounter with the thugs beating up the priest who was trying to find the missing kids from the orphanage. So if you didn't introduce her in the first chapter, this is another chance to introduce her to the player characters, because she does play a somewhat reoccurring role throughout the campaign. And it's even referenced that she could become the subject of a potential romance plot between her and one of the player characters if you run that sort of thing. I typically don't, but it's just cool to see her included here again. She provides information that the player character should investigate a location known as Oric's Bathhouse, because there's something unusual going on there that might be linked to these goblin occurrences. So when the characters get to the bathhouse, they discover that the bathhouse is being watched over by a group of were-rats. And after dealing with the were-rats, they likely discover, or have the potential to discover, the fact that the dwarven proprietor of the bathhouse is actually under the influence of some sort of mind control enchantment spell. So they can either break the spell themselves if they have the means to, or they can take him somewhere where he can have the spell broken, or they may just never learn it at all. It depends again on how observant they are and kind of the way that they interact with this character. However, the proprietor is under the effects of a domination ability by a creature by the name of Drakthar, a bugbear barbarian who lives in a series of tunnels that actually connect to the bathhouse and lead to the outside, the foot of the volcano, the base of the volcano, leads out of the city of Cauldron to the nearby surrounding countryside. When the characters enter the caves, they deal with the goblins that are in there, they deal with the vampiric Drakthar, the bugbear vampire himself, and they also discover that there are a group of mercenaries operating in there with some sort of uneasy alliance going on with the vampiric bugbear. And once they're all dealt with, if the characters continue to follow Drakthar's tunnels out to the outside of the city of Cauldron, they discover that there is a large camp filled with a group of HalfOrc mercenaries. Now, the HalfOrc mercenaries are too numerous for the characters to want anything to do with at that point in time, and they're also technically not breaking any laws. They're simply camping outside of the city. They're not disrupting anything. In fact, if the characters didn't go through the tunnels, then nobody would even know that they were there. But the HalfOrcs Mercenaries are part of future events in the campaign. So later on in the story, one of the things that happens is the City Watch starts being augmented by groups of these HalfOrc mercenaries. And there's like rumors going around about like nobody knows where these half-orcs came from because nobody saw them actually enter the city. But beyond that, it's never really addressed. So I'll share my thoughts on the new chapter and my own personal experience running that new chapter at the end of the video. But basically, it fills that one level gap as well as, sort of foreshadowing some future events there, which is pretty cool. Like I said, the rest of the book is pretty much the same, again, with just some minor changes. Again, locations in the magazine that may have taken place under the city of Cauldron may have been moved to the nearby countryside just to make the Undercity not feel so crowded. One of the bigger changes actually takes place in the adventure, just a second here, the Demon Scar Legacy. I was trying to remember the name of it. So in the Demon Scar Legacy, the players are sent to track down the paladin by the name of Alec Turcival. He is a paladin of St. Cuthbert, and he's a close personal friend to the now, at this point, High Priestess of St. Cuthbert, an individual, an NPC that the characters would have likely had several encounters with and should have a good rapport with, a priestess by the name of Jenya. So she is worried about her friend. He challenged the captain of the city guard, believing that the captain of the guard had become corrupt and was looking to replace him. However, after the issue was challenged, or the challenge was issued, I should say, Alec disappeared. So the characters sort of track him down. Now, as it turns out, Alec had been possessed by he hadn't been possessed, he'd been deceived by a group of hags that allowed him to drink this elixir that gave him great strength, but basically destroyed his mind. It rendered him near insane, and they sent him through a relic known as the Starry Mirror. It was a portal that led to a series of extra-dimensional chambers where it was a color-based puzzle where you had to sort of go through it, and once you got to the other side, you were, hundreds of miles away in an unknown desert location, and they discover Alec there, just kind of the effects of the strength-enhancing elixir have worn off, and he's been stuck here for an extended period of time and is, again, kind of lost most of his coherency at this point. During the climactic encounter with Nabatheron, a Glabrazu, who was also on the other side of the Starry Mirror, the Alec Turcival mysteriously either dies if he hadn't suffered enough damage to die during the encounter, or even if he should have died early in the encounter or previously during the encounter, he's still alive long enough to issue one other strange cryptic set of instructions delivered in a voice that was not his. In the magazine, it was essentially a voice of unknown origin that they went with. They didn't actually describe exactly who it was or connect it to a particular creature. In the hardcover, they actually connect it to an astral diva by the name of Nidrama, who is actually the guardian of the Cauldron area, although she cannot act directly. She kind of broke some rules to give the characters the information that she did at the end of the Demon Scar Legacy. But in the magazine, Alec dies after delivering the message, even if he shouldn't have. So if he would have survived the encounter, he basically delivers that information with Nidrama's voice and then dies. If he would have died or should have died, he stays alive long enough to deliver the information and then passes away. In the hardcover, he can survive. So if he doesn't die from the attack against the Glabrazu, then he can just sort of pal around with the characters as they go through the test of the Smoking Eye in the Akapitis, and then eventually make his way back to Cauldron, where he can rescind his challenge and ultimately sort of be pardoned for what the city government refer to as disturbing the peace sort of thing. So they can kind of smooth that over. So if you wanted to keep Alec alive in the magazine, kind of as written prevented you from doing that, then you can in the hardcover. That's probably, like I said, the single biggest change to one of the adventures beyond the web enhancements from the Life's Bazaar. Otherwise, the adventure is more or less run the way that it was before. Again, some minor changes may have been added to sort of combine the stories a little bit tighter than they would have been with the magazines, which tried to keep them relatively separate from one another. But most of that stuff was pretty minor changes that were made. So again, not really worth going into too much, just that they tightened up the campaign. The only other two really major changes that I can think of is before the city starts, having tremors, and just before the Tree of Shackled Souls, the ritual to free Adamarcus from his prison, just before that goes on, Adamarcus's madness starts sort of permeating through into Cauldron, and you'll have some townsfolk just go insane. They would sort of just mumble things or just say these sort of random phrases in the magazine. In the hardcover, some of them do actually refer to themselves as Adamarcus. The other thing was in one of the Cage Wright's chambers during the Foundation of Flame, actually, during this adventure here, where you go down into the volcano to stop it from erupting. There you find some of the Cage Wrights, the leaders of this organization. In one of their chambers, there is a shrine to, in the magazine, it's a somewhat obscure or unknown demon lord, whereas in the hardcover, it's Adamarcus, because he's the driving force behind everything, even though in the magazines, he is mentioned during the character's time in Akapitis, and is not mentioned again until you get to the very final chapter of Asylum. So the campaign, the hardcover, does a better job of keeping Adamarcus's name fresh in the PC's mind all throughout. So that's basically the adventure portion of it. But what we also have in this book are some new tools, some new player aid or DM aids for running the game itself. So let's just take a look at some of those. We have the magic items, the major NPCs, some of the artifacts and stuff. But then we get into this chapter here, which has some prestige classes. So during the course of the campaign, the characters interact with two relatively well-established groups in the Cauldron region. One of them is an organization known as the Chisel. They're kind of like the Freemasons, basically, of the D&D world, or of the Cauldron region. Now, in the magazines, if any of them actually had stats, they were essentially aristocrat, level 1, 2, or 3 or something like that, and then they may have had a level of 2 of fighter or wizard or something like that. But here, they actually give the High Handcrafter prestige class, so they can have a few levels in those to have abilities that kind of line up with what the organization is sort of meant to do. The other prestige class that they introduce here is called the Path Warden, and that belongs to the Striders of Farlangen. So again, the characters that the players would interact with, especially from the beginning, in the first chapter, there's Ferio Elegoth and Felian Shard. They're two half-elf, I think they're half-elf brothers, but they're two half-elf members of the Striders of Farlangen that actually accompany the players during the events of Life's Bazaar, and they can be encountered later on in the campaign as well. But this time, instead of just being whatever the regular standard, player handbook classes or NPC classes they would have had, you can also give them, or they would also have some levels of the Pathward class, which we might see a little bit of here a little bit later on. You also have reproduced the artwork of all the friendly faces, we'll say. These are the NPCs, the not necessarily villainous NPCs, but just the NPCs that the characters can interact with. You've got the Stormblades over here. You got the Striders of Farlangen here. You've got Genya and Alec, as well as a few other individuals of note. There's Nidrama. So you sort of have all them, and it just gives you who each of them are. Up next, you have just all of the creature stats all included together at the back of the book. So any unique NPCs or creatures from the monster manual that may have had changes made to them, like they had extra hit dice added or templates applied to them, they're all reproduced here at the back of the book in alphabetical order. And then we also have, and this is probably my favorite section here, the recurring NPC chapter, or not chapter, but the section of the appendices here. So there are several NPCs that the characters may encounter repeatedly throughout the campaign, including the Stormblades, which are a rival group of adventurers that are sort of, they're like the town heroes. Like they're the ones that get all the praise and all the attention from the locals, at least at the beginning of the campaign. And a lot of their deeds actually kind of mirror what the players have done, but just slightly different. In fact, they also like do things like collapse some of the lava tubes below the city, which actually makes getting to some locations bit more difficult because the easiest way to access them was through those tubes, which they had collapsed for the right reasons or for good reasons, but just something that ends up being a little bit of a thorn in the PC side. So these charts actually give you their level progression from the moment you first encounter them in the campaign all the way up until the very final chapter. Now, all of these recurring NPCs never get beyond 19th level, because they wanted the player characters to be the most powerful heroes in the region at that point in time, like by the time the campaign's done. But it does give you what their class breakdown is. So, for example, Anna Taskerhill here, she is one of the members of the Stormblades. She starts as an aristocrat level 1 and a bard level 4. And then eventually she gets up to Aristocrat 1 and a 18th level Bard. You also get things like their base attack progression, their attack bonus, their saving throws, so Fortitude, Reflex, and Will, their spells per day, special abilities that they would have had, the feats that they have, their ability score increases, and their, like, whatever spells they learn, and the magic equipment and gear that they acquire. So it gives you that for all of the different characters. You have like Cora Lathenmeyer here. She is another member of the Stormblades, and she starts off as an aristocrat level 1 and a swashbuckler from the Complete Warrior book. And then eventually she also becomes a duelist, so she actually adds a prestige class there. Then we get Felian Shard and Ferio Elegoth, again, those members of the Striders of Farlangen. And here you can see that they begin, or they actually get the Path Warden prestige class. So sort of gaining those levels as they go. Felian starts as a rogue cleric, and Ferio starts as a rogue fighter. And even though Ferio Elegoth does not actually take the Path Warden prestige class, Felian Shard does, so it's kind of cool to see, again, them sort of get those abilities as they progress. And we also have Jenya here, so she is the cleric, the high priestess of St. Cuthbert, or just a priestess of St. Cuthbert at the beginning of the campaign, but very early on she does become the high priestess and is someone who has lots of dealings with the player characters. So this gives all her stuff as well, including her spell progression. So again, you know what the highest level spell is that she can cast if the players need her for things like, Raise Dead or other such spells. So again, really cool stuff there. You get those reoccurring NPCs, you get some artwork for them, just sort of like their headshots, if you will. Then you get all of the villains reproduced, including Orbis Philanthro, one of my favorite villainous NPCs of all time. And then you get some character creation information. So this is a chapter that's really designed to help make all of the races and classes just sort of explain how they kind of operate, or sort of how you can work them into the Cauldron region. So, for example, like if your choice in class, like sort of how those classes might be represented in the nearby area. So let's just take a look at Barbarians here. It says much of the campaign takes place in dungeon or urban environments. As such, a barbarian designed to excel in wilderness won't have much to do as one who focuses his skill points on things like climb, intimidate, jump, and listen. So it's just some suggestions that you may want to give your players, again, to help them get the most of their characters while they're traveling through the Cauldron region, which is really cool. You also have the local heroes section, which gives you some rudimentary backgrounds. Now, with 4th edition, and particularly with 5th edition, and even Pathfinder 2nd edition, backgrounds have become a major part of your character creation. So like in 5th edition, your background gives you certain skill proficiencies, it gives you your starting equipment, your starting gold. as well as some personality traits that you can use to sort of define your character. In 4th edition, backgrounds would give you some minor skill bonuses, and like that was one of the earliest introductions of backgrounds in as part of like the standard part of the rule set. But here we actually have some ways of giving abilities to your characters or to your players that, again, tie them into the world itself. We're not going to go through necessarily all of these here, but we'll take a look at the Child of Zitterune. Again, that was the Gnomish Enclave where the magical plague, the Vanishing, sort of took hold. So it says here, if you take this, you or one of your ancestors, lived in Zitterune at the time the Vanishing struck. You are especially resilient to diseases, but find the prospect of becoming sick yourself horrifying. So these don't give you like skills necessarily, but they do give you some sort of like minor benefit and a minor drawback. So the benefit here is that you gain a +2 bonus on all saving throws made to resist the effects of disease, regular or magical. And then the drawback is you suffer a -2 morale penalty on saving throws against fear while either in the ruins of Zitterune or when fighting creatures that can infect you with the disease, either through an ability, a spell, or like an extraordinary or supernatural ability. You would, if they issued any sort of fear effect against you, you would actually suffer a -2 penalty. And the role-playing ideas just says your parents told you harrowing stories about the Vanishing, and your dreams are haunted by visions in which you catch the disease and slowly fade away. So it's really cool to see these sort of things added here because it wasn't something that was really being done at the time. And even after this campaign, there's not really a ton of things that also had these sort of, background abilities that you could add to your character. So it was really cool to see at the time. And I think, at least in the beginning, I think 1 or 2 of the players actually took advantage of some of these. I can't remember completely off the top of my head which ones that they took, but it was just a really cool addition and something that, would eventually just become a standard part of the rules where you just have like backgrounds that grant you things. Although this one was tried to be a little bit more balanced by giving you an advantage as well as a disadvantage. But again, just a really, really cool thing to have in there. And then you've got your handouts. So all the various things you can photocopy and hand out to your players. And then you just get some advertisements for Dungeon & Dragon magazine, including like back issues of both magazines, and an advertisement for the upcoming Age of Worms. And then in the back of the book here, we actually have the aftermath of what Cauldron looks like at the end of the campaign. So this is after the volcanic eruption is just barely stopped by the player characters. However, parts of Cauldron were still affected by the seismic activity. So portions of the city have actually collapsed. And it's actually presented here at the back of the cover, which is really cool. So the front cover has the city looking, fine and pristine. And at the back of the book, you actually have the city partially destroyed, which we also have at the other side of this fold-out map. So again, you've got the destroyed portion of Cauldron. So that's the book, that's the fold-out map. You also get a booklet that you can pull out of the book. It's of the hardcover, which contains all of the maps that you would need when running this campaign. So all of the dungeon locations that the characters explore, everything like that is reproduced here. So you don't have to get them out of the book. They're not actually printed in the book. They're printed here in this booklet, or having to use the magazine. So all of the maps are reproduced here, which is again really, really cool to see. And they are some really nice maps that they had here. Some of the kind of complex maps that were not fun to try to describe to the players to have them map out themselves back in the day. And so there you go. See, that's all the stuff they got there. So overall, this is a really cool set. I really wish that this, a book like this would have been released for the Age of Worms adventure path, as well as the Savage Tide adventure path. Unfortunately, by the time they would have been able to do the Age of Worms one, it was already announced that they were losing the license to Dungeon Magazine, and that Dungeon Magazine was going to cease physical publication. So it was kind of a shame that we never got any other books from Paizo for the official adventure paths, but this one was really, really cool. Being able to sort of tidy up the adventures and connect them better to the overall story was really appreciated here. Having all of the background information from the very beginning of the campaign was also very appreciated when it came time to run it. And having the inclusion of the extra chapter was fine. There was a one level gap in the magazines as far as character progression goes, so something needed to be done with that. And Drakthar's way is just as good as any way of being able to sort of fill that void. Again, I don't know if the adventure was actually originally designed around the same time as the adventure path, or if it was developed afterwards when they realized that they were going to be doing the hardcover and they were missing a level of progression there. The adventure itself is pretty cool. Going up against a vampire at 3rd level seems kind of daunting. Drakthar technically should be a vampire spawn just based on his hit dice and everything, but don't let that get in the way of a cool villain. But the adventure itself is largely filler, and in the literal sense too, because it's literally there to fill a gap that was left. But the events that take place within that adventure really don't have much of a role to play later on. Like, it does sort of set up the mystery of where these HalfOrc mercenaries come from, or it basically, solves the mystery before it becomes a mystery of these HalfOrc mercenaries. Like, they're not seen entering the city, so where are they coming from? But that was ultimately a very, very, very minor plot point that really had no major bearing on the campaign as a whole. Like, the mercenaries were supposed to be there to replace the city watch, so that when the time came for the cage rights to wreak havoc on the city, that they would have their own loyal force of guards that would do whatever they wanted. But that, again, didn't actually play a role in the campaign. So I don't know if it was like a plot point that they initially planned on it being a bigger part of the campaign, but ultimately decided that there was already enough going on, or if it was just never really meant to be all that well fleshed out and just something for people to gossip about in town. It's hard to say, but it's ultimately, it's there. You do get a cool encounter with, this bugbear vampire, which was kind of neat, but otherwise, it was pretty forgetful. So when I ran this chapter, because I did run based off the hardcover is actually what got me to start running the adventure path, and I'm so glad that I did. But when I was running the Drakthar's Way, there wasn't really much of it that kind of stuck in my memory. Like, I can't tell you exactly how the characters reacted to the HalfOrc mercenaries, or anything like that. Like, I think they were like, huh, that's, concerning, but I don't think it ever went beyond that. The only thing I really remember is when the characters went to Oryx's bathhouse. One of the players, once he realized that they were in a bathhouse and saw that there was a bath drawn, just immediately ripped off his wizard robes and dove into the bath, wearing only the suit that he was born with. Now, because like shortly after the characters enter, like if they start asking questions about like the goblins, or if there's anything unusual going on, that's when the were-rats actually launch their attack on the party. And so the wizard was kind of caught in a compromising situation in the bath. However, his gear was next to the bath, so the thing that I remember the most, because it is seared into my brain as a memory that I cannot get rid of no matter how hard I try, where he would, quote, leap out of the bath and fire his wands at the were-rats. Anyway, so maybe that's why I try not to remember Drakthar's Way all that much. It's a cool adventure. It's filler. Like, you could just not run it and have the players gain 4th level either at the end of Life's Bazaar or early in the flood season, and honestly, you're really not missing too much other than a potentially mentally traumatizing, sequence of events there. But this was a great hardcover. It was a great compilation. The character progression charts for the reoccurring NPCs was awesome. The only thing I wasn't super keen on was having the NPC or the creature stats being at the back of the book and being in alphabetical order. I honestly would have preferred if they either appeared in the chapters that they were present in the actual adventure, or if it would have been something similar to the map booklet here, where it was something that you could pull out and it was just a little booklet that had all of the stat blocks in it. I think that would have been better. Or if the stat blocks were organized by the actual, like if they just were printed at the end of each individual adventure chapter as opposed to just at the back of the book. It's not a huge deal. It was just sometimes it was kind of a pain to find the stat during gameplay. So what I ended up doing was eventually I just started typing out the stats and printing them off myself. So that's kind of how I handled it. But that's really honestly a very minor nitpick in what was otherwise an excellent hardcover compilation. And again, the Shackeled City Adventure Path was very important for D&D 3rd edition, as well as for Paizo Publishing. The Adventure Path was such a successful concept that even after Paizo lost the rights to publish Dungeon Magazine, they still were able to carry over their current subscriptions by offering people that were subscribed to Dungeon Magazine an ability to essentially, without having to pay any extra cost, subscribe to their new Pathfinder product line, which started with the Rise of the Rune Lords Adventure Path, and they would have received, monthly or bi-monthly, however frequently they were coming out, they would have received like the installments of the Adventure Path. Even to this day, Paizo still offers subscription services on their website, including a subscription to their ongoing Adventure Path. So you just get the Adventure Path installment every single month for the stories as they come out. So this was, again, a very influential product for Paizo Publishing, and they would also go to do hardcover compilations for both the Rise of the Rune Lords Adventure Path as well as the Curse of the Crimson Throne Adventure Path, which were the first two Pathfinder Adventure Paths, which were released not for the Pathfinder rule set, because that didn't exist until 2009, but originally Pathfinder was just the brand that they would use, and the Golarion was the world that they would use to release products for 3rd edition D&D using the Open Gaming license, before they finally made their own rule set, which became the Pathfinder role-playing game. Curse of the Crimson Throne and Rise of the Rune Lords would receive updates in the form of those hardcovers, which were published for updating it to the Pathfinder 1st edition from the original installments of the 3rd edition Open Gaming license individual installments that you would have gotten as part of a subscription that was originally for Dungeon Magazine, but then transferred over to those adventure paths. So again, really influential, really cool to see the compilation. I wish they would have done more of them, but overall a very, very solid product, and one that it's one of my favorite books in my collection, and it's tied to a lot of really fond and some disturbing gaming memories. Let me know in the comments below, did you pick up the Shackeled City hardcover compilation book back in the day? Did you pick it up sometime later? Did you run the campaign or play in it? And what are some of your favorite moments from the Shackeled City Adventure Path? Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I apologize for taking so long to finally get to this video, but I'm glad I finally did. And until next time, take care.